At Cox Mobile, we know you're smart. You make coffee ice cubes for your cold brew. You also added Cox Mobile so you can save on your Cox internet. So smart. Cox Mobile. Cox postpaid internet required. Prices exclude taxes, device activation, and other fees and charges, which are subject to change. Other terms and conditions apply. Learn more at cox.com/mobile.
We are audiostack.ai.
Combining AI writing, the best synthetic voices,
with production and delivery.
Be it ads, podcasts, or VOs for video.
Just like this ad. How would you utilize AI audio? For free.
Go to audiostack.ai/contest.
Give us just a few details.
And you could replace this spot and be heard by millions.
See webpage for T's and C's. audiostack.ai/contest.
You're in the Paracast, the gold standard of paranormal radio. And now, here's Gene Steinberg.
So, folks, what I was doing for the past few days, when I had spare time, was to go onto YouTube and watch videos of old movie serials. Like, for example, Zombies of the Stratosphere from Republic Pictures around 1952 or 53. What is notable about it? Well, one of the aliens is portrayed by Leonard Nimoy. So when people think that Spock was the first alien he played, no, it was this unnamed character in that movie. And also it featured Judd Haldren, who had played Commando Cody, and Captain Video, as a guy named Larry Martin, which makes no sense to me because in the next movie he puts on a mask and says, "I am Commando Cody." If we want to find consistency in plots, that's not the way to do it. But talking about pop culture, classic movies, movie serials, westerns, whatever, Brian Walker is the drive-in guy to join us. How you doing, Brian?
I am well today. How are you, Gene?
Oh, enjoying all that junk. Do you ever sit down and watch a movie serial straight through chapter by chapter by chapter?
Well, actually, I have done that many times. I think the one that I can recall, the first one that I ever watched from beginning to end was Crash Corrigan's Undersea Kingdom. A funny story about that one, too. I actually streamed it. It's probably the first serial I ever streamed. This was about 20 years ago or so, and I was moving from one division to another, and I was cleaning out my office and just let it run while I was packing things up. And it really spurred an interest in checking out some of the old movie serials. And you watched Zombies of the Stratosphere, because that's what, 52, 53?
What is interesting about it, Zombies of the Stratosphere, is they never say why they call them zombies, because they're not zombies. And they never explain, to get things even crazier, they never explain why the word stratosphere is used, because they're flying, I guess they're in the stratosphere, flying in a spaceship, but they're from another planet. Why not zombies from Mars or something?
You know, in 1950s television or film programming, the title didn't necessarily have anything to do with the film. Ballyhoo was at its peak then, and you had to hype a film, and you couldn't hype a film that was just like a day off from work or something like that. You got to have a more engaging title, even if the movie itself stinks. So that's my take on it, and I'm sure Zombies sounded pretty, frightening, and then Stratosphere. Well, we're at the dawn of the space age, so made it seem new and current.
Well, the other thing about it too is that this particular film, like a lot of the Last Republic serials, they reused footage from older movies. Like that had a 1949 movie called King of the Rocket Man, which had these great flying scenes from the Lydecker brothers that show this man wearing the rocket suit and flying. Same technology was used in The Adventures of Captain Marvel. Some of the best flying scenes. So they took all those great scenes and infused them into 3 other characters for 3 other movies. The same footage over and over again.
Right, so the actual new footage is really not that much if you think about it.
In terms of reusing stuff, I think of the TV series Adventures of Superman. To save money, what they did is they would film for all the episodes of that season everything that occurred in one particular scene. So they go into Perry White's office, and all the scripts describing Perry White's office, they do them all at one time. That's why they never changed clothing. Then, of course, in Clark Kent's office, then, of course, Superman taking off, which is reused again. They did everything to cheap out. The way they cheaped out, unfortunately, also was the salaries they paid, like a couple of $100 a week for like Lois Lane and for...
George Reeves didn't make that much, but as we've come to find out, he was paying the bills on his back anyway. So.
Well, George Reeves, however, he did get a decent salary because he was like one of the most popular entertainers.
True, but nothing to sustain the lifestyle that he was used to. He lived in a really great area in Beverly Hills. Had a brand new 59 Oldsmobile 98 convertible. He was, and at this point, he hadn't been Superman for 2 years. So,
yeah, definitely he lived above his means. I mean, remember also when they did a season of Superman, it wasn't like 22, 23 shows. It was like 12 or 13 per season. So that's when you get paid. Whatever he got paid times 12 or 13, that's his paycheck for the year. But he did make public appearances and get money for that. And he even, and he even was a. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say the public appearances for TV stars in the 50s and 60s, like George Reeves was Superman, or some of the cast of the Beverly Hillbillies would do, let's say, state fairs, county fairs, and things like that when they weren't working, because it paid them way more money than they were actually making, on the set of this TV series.
And also sometimes they would do the commercials for an advertiser. So you'd see, for example, Jack Larson, Jimmy Olsen, George Reeves sitting at a breakfast table having Kellogg's Corn Flakes and pushing it. Of course, they're getting paid to appear in a spot. But you'll notice, and this is the 50s sensibility, Lois Lane was never in those commercials because that would raise a question. How was she there in Clark's apartment, I presume, having breakfast with Jimmy and Clark?
Ooh, hubba hubba. Oddly enough, though, there wasn't any scandal with Clark and Jimmy being in the apartment having cereal for breakfast. So that's kind of an interesting observation.
Well, the interesting observation also is that Jack Larson was gay. Not that it should make a difference, but that happened to be a fact. So those of us who know that, and I don't think it was known outside the Hollywood community then, would wonder, okay, what is going on here? But we shouldn't think about that because we're talking about here a TV show that was, I'd say, dumbed down for children. Not that children are dumb, but you had to simplify things. You couldn't show blood and gore. The same thing being true in all those movie serials we're talking about. You see these fight scenes, every episode has people knocking the bejesus out of each other. But nobody ever gets an injury, no black eyes, no concussions, no torn clothing.
That requires a lot of makeup and hair and wardrobe. And those things are expensive.
Well, there was one scene I read about where in the first Commando Cody movie, and what was that called? Radar Men from the Moon. That's the one. Okay, Radar Men from the Moon. Broadway actor named George D. Wallace played the role of Commando Cody without a mask. Now, he had a pretty good career going forward as a character actor. So he was a real actor. And one of the villains was played by Clayton Moore, best known as the Lone Ranger.
Right. If you watch a lot of serials, particularly the ones from Republic, you'll see Clayton Moore pop up fairly often. He had been in some westerns in the background, but he's really good in these heavy roles where he's sort of like an evil henchman, a thug. He's really good in them, and it's growing up with the image of Clayton Moore as the Lone Ranger, you have a very different look at. He's actually a better actor than you would normally say that somebody like someone portraying the Lone Ranger, a guy in a mask, would be.
The point also is that because he's appearing without the mask, a lot of people wouldn't recognize him as the same guy.
True. That's a very good point.
And he is the only one in that movie who shows personality, because the alien villain tells him, go rob this bank. And he says, I'm on parole. I can't do that. So finally they agree to have him watch it or stay outside in the car, but not to participate in the robbery. That is actually showing one modicum of personality here that
True.
He displayed. Oh, drive-in movies, pop culture, movie serials, all the real good stuff of ages gone by. With Brian and Gene and Tim, you're in
The Paracast.
We are audiostack.ai
Combining AI writing, the best synthetic voices,
with production and delivery.
Be it ads, podcasts, or VOs for video.
Just like this ad. How would you utilize AI audio? For free.
go to audiostack.ai/contest.
Give us just a few details.
And you could replace this spot and be heard by millions.
See webpage for T's and C's. audiostack.ai/contest.
Inside every California avocado is a story. It's shaped by idyllic conditions, full of rich soil, gentle rain, and friendly California sunshine, where avocados flourish. Crafted with care by dedicated local farmers who are committed to responsible, sustainable growing. The best avocados have California in them. To understand why, all you have to do is open one up. In season now. Visit CaliforniaAvocado.com to learn more.
Hi, this is Don Ecker, and you are tuned into the Paracast. Let me tell you what, you're going to hear stuff here that you probably won't hear anywhere else. Hear that, George Snorri?
The reason we bring up movie serials, of course, is that people who were really young in those days would watch them. They would present them as part of a double feature at the local movie theater. That's before you had movie plexes with, 10 theaters in one place. It was one movie theater. You go there and see two pictures, or you see two pictures in a movie serial, or one picture in a movie serial. And of course, you didn't choose which serial they would show, but usually they'd be from 13 to 20 minutes long, usually the first chapter being 20 minutes or so. And each week there would be a cliffhanger, like, I'll give you one example, Adventures of Captain Marvel. Billy Batson plays Captain Marvel. This is before they called him Shazam for reasons we won't get into. Anyway, there's a scene in a cabin where he and Betty, the female lead, I think the only female in the whole movie, and they're captured and placed in this cabin, and he has a gag on his mouth, so he can't say the magic words. But Captain Marvel told Betty if she needed to reach him, call him on shortwave radio, which he's trying to do. In the meantime, he's trying to get out of his gag. At the same time, planes are flying overhead ready to drop bombs because this is a test range. And you see the explosion. Next chapter, seconds before the bombs fall, he gets the gag off his mouth and says, Shazam, and becomes Tom Tyler. Well, that got great reaction.
Sorry, I thought you were still going.
That's what a lot of people say, but then I just stop.
That's okay. The film serials are a really interesting thing to study, and I think we're actually in danger of forgetting about them, unfortunately. But they were sort of pre-television entertainment that was episodic, and a lot of what you see in serial production, where you have anywhere from typically 12 to 15 chapters, that continuation of a particular plot with the same cast, really, it spilled over into early television. And that's what really happened to the serials. It just moved to television production. And if you look at early television production, like The Adventures of Superman, they did have to do the same thing. They had to recycle anything that they could. The amazing thing that I find about The Adventures of Superman is that it was shot in color for the last, 5 seasons. Color was expensive, and especially in the early days of television, to go color like that was and that's one of the things I think that has kept that show alive. One of the no cost. I think it's FETV. It's one of the broadcast channels that offers a lot of old programming. Runs The Adventures of Superman every week. It's a good, I think it's on the weekends, as a matter of fact. So, I mean, you can still watch that, whereas you don't see most other 1950s TV series. And I think it's because they did scrape enough coins together to actually shoot it in color, even though they couldn't afford decent clothing. Or Phyllis Coates once commented that the wardrobe for her first season, or her only season on The Adventures of Superman, was just horrible. And that was as much reason as any for her to quit the job. She said it was just awful.
Well, she didn't have much of a career after that.
No, she didn't. But she was married 4 times, had 3 children by husbands, like 2, 3, and 4. So, I mean, that would be trying to raise 3 kids, and be, a working actress, that could not have been easy, especially back then.
Certainly, Noel Neill, the other Lois Lane, didn't have much of a career after Adventures of Superman, but she did show up in one other Superman-related film, in Superman the movie, 1978.
Right.
You don't see it in the original cut, but in the director's cut. There's a scene in a train, a speeding train, and you see the young Clark Kent speeding past the train. More powerful than a locomotive or whatever. In that seat is this little girl who's supposedly the young Lois Lane, the mother who is Noel Neill, and the father who is Kirk Alyn, the first live-action Superman.
Right. That was summer of '78 when Superman came out. I was a teenager. I was probably, 13 years old. And it was such a blockbuster. I think Jaws from 1975 was really the first massive summer blockbuster, and the movie that I think is responsible for kind of having a mandatory big picture, every summer that everyone sees. In 1978, that was Superman, from what I recall. And it was unusual in that not too long after its release, I would say no more than about 6 months or so, Universal released digest versions of Superman onto 16 and Super 8 millimeter film. And I was a hobbyist at the time, and I had Super 8 millimeter, and I actually had one of those digest versions. It was kind of pricey at the time because it was color and sound, and you only got a snippet of the movie, let's say about 16, 17 minutes of it, but it was enough to give you a taste of the film. And like I said, very popular, terrifically made movie. That could have gone wrong in so many different ways, especially with having somebody who was sort of unknown, at the time with Christopher Reeve. And they did do a lot of callbacks in the movie, which I think is just fabulous. It's wonderful to bring these people back and make them part of it, even if it's only for a day or two.
Well, Marlon Brando got paid the largest amount of money, I think, because that was his condition to go in there. And I understand he read his parts off a teleprompter.
Yeah, he did. Apparently, that was a long-standing tradition with him after some point in his career. He just seemed to be there for the check, after a while. And, hey, I was a professor. Well, I still am, actually, but for, 30 years. So I certainly understand after a while getting disgusted and just taking the check. But not to the degree that he did. He was going to be there for the minimal time possible. He was going to only put this much effort into it. Fortunately, he was talented enough to be able to get away with it. He just had the presence, really. I don't know if it was even talent, but just presence.
He was a good Jor-El, except for one thing. He pronounced the name of his planet Krypton wrong. He said Krypton.
And nobody was going to correct him either.
I think, though, Russell Crowe played a good Jor-El in Man of Steel.
I have not seen that. To tell you the truth, I spend so much of my time trying to catch up on all the old bad movies, the old B movies, that it sometimes gets in the way of me watching a new movie or at least a good movie. So I'm often really behind when it comes to new films. It took me forever just to see Renfield.
Well, with Man of Steel, it was a grim movie. In some ways, kind of being like Marvel Comics, where they destroy half of Metropolis in this fight, Superman against General Zod. And at the end of the movie, they're, I guess, inside a large train station, and he is trying to stop General Zod from zapping these innocent people with his X-ray vision. So he breaks his neck. Now, supposedly, Superman doesn't kill anybody, but that's not true, because if you go back to the Adventures of Superman, he did, in different ways, force people to die. There was an example, maybe it wasn't him doing it, where someone steals his costume. And he finds out who they are, but there's a scene where they realize Clark Kent is Superman. So he takes him to this mountaintop and says, I'll bring you food and everything until I figure out what to do. He flies off, and they say, he's not going to do that. He's going to leave us here to die. So they try to climb down the mountain. They fall to their deaths. So indirectly, I suppose Superman caused their deaths. Practically, I guess he didn't. But in the original Adventures of Captain Marvel with Tom Tyler, Captain Marvel was not averse to killing a few people in that film. He'd throw people over a mountain or out of a building or something. No problem. Cool. And then he'd say Shazam, and he'd be this innocent kid. And we've got more about pop culture, movies, and all that good stuff with Brian Walker, the drive-in guy. Gene and Tim, you're in
the Paracast.
We are audiostack.ai.
Combining AI writing, the best synthetic voices,
with production and delivery.
Be it ads, podcasts, or VOs for video.
Just like this ad.
How would you utilize AI audio? For free.
Go to audiostack.ai/contest.
Give us just a few details.
And you could replace this spot and be heard by millions.
See webpage for T's and C's. audiostack.ai/contest.
Inside every California avocado is a story. It's shaped by idyllic conditions, full of rich soil, gentle rain, and friendly California sunshine, where avocados flourish. Crafted with care by dedicated local farmers who are committed to responsible, sustainable growing. The best avocados have California in them. To understand why, all you have to do is open one up. In season now. Visit CaliforniaAvocado.com to learn more.
This is Jennifer Stein, executive producer of The Disclosure Dialogues. You're listening to The Paracast, the gold standard of paranormal radio.
Now, growing up in a big city, Brooklyn, New York, and going into Manhattan to watch the movies, I never went to drive-ins until I was an adult with my own car. Because we didn't have drive-ins in Brooklyn or on 42nd Street.
No, that would be really inconvenient. And hey, Gene, I misspoke. I didn't remember Russell Crowe being in Man of Steel, but I have seen the movie. With it, I kept thinking, who was the Superman in that one? And it was Henry Cavill. So, but yeah, if you grew up, in the nation's largest city, you weren't going to see any drive-ins. Now, I grew up largely in the upper Midwest, where every town probably had 3 or 4 drive-ins. And the majority of the films that I saw, probably until I was at least, 15 years old, probably was at the drive-in, really. And the drive-ins where we lived in Michigan were equipped for, the fall and winter months, as long as we didn't have too much snow. And they actually had little heaters that you could check out from the box office as you came through. And there was a plug on the pole where the speaker was, and you could plug that heater in. They were pretty crude, and you'd score some third-degree burns on them if you weren't careful, because back then there weren't so many product liability lawsuits like there are now. But you could go to the drive-in in the winter. And I think the Ford drive-in theater in Dearborn still has winter month operations.
I know there are some still left in Arizona. And of course, after having the portable speakers held by wires, they then broadcast a signal to your FM radio.
Right. Mm-hmm.
You had to have a very clear windshield also.
And the drive-ins that are still around in my general area, let's say within a 75-minute drive where I live very close to southwestern Pennsylvania, where there are many drive-ins, relatively speaking, still around. A lot of them will remind people that they might want to bring an FM radio if they're squeamish about having their accessory key set for 3 or 4 hours while you're at the drive-in. So they do try to warn people, about the FM technology. That had to have saved drive-ins a lot of money, though, instead of having to maintain all of those speakers and the wiring and people hitting the poles and stuff like that.
Yes, indeed.
And I got to tell you, as a child, going to the drive-in, it was ideal because you could wear your pajamas. You weren't out on, as you said, 42nd Street in your pajamas or anything. You were just, in the back seat of your car. And
Speak for yourself.
And oftentimes they would have a little playground in the very front, right in front of the screen, with a swing set and things like that, for kids, because they did a lot of the drive-ins were still trying to appeal to families. Unfortunately, later in the 70s, when families had stopped going to the drive-in, switched over to porn, and they didn't, of course, didn't need the playgrounds anymore. Probably just more Kleenex.
Don't get me started there. Actually, that's funny. There was a movie theater on 42nd Street, not the porn stuff, but they would show the classic films. And my dad and I would go there every couple of weeks. That's where I saw one chapter from Adventures of Captain Marvel. We'd see some of the Universal horror films, like something like House of Dracula or something. That's when, at the tail end of the Universal revolution for horror films, they couldn't get away with just one monster. You'd have to have 2 or 3. So like House of Dracula had Dracula, a mad doctor played by, I think Boris Karloff in that one, or Onslow Stevens, Lon Chaney Jr. as the Wolfman, and Glenn Strange as the Frankenstein monster. And then someone as a hunchback.
I did go to the downtown theater that we had. It was called what was it called? The City Theater or Bay City Theater. I think it's what it was called. It's since been raised. But it had been built in the 20s or 30s, and I don't think it had been cleaned, since probably the 20s or 30s as well. So the floor was just permanently sticky. And new films didn't run there because a lot of people were kind of grossed out by it. But you could get in it was insanely cheap. I want to say 50 cents to 75 cents, something like that. And you would get 2 horror films on Saturday. So a lot of kids, like me, did go. But even though the theater was disgusting and it had a really scary subterranean men's room that you really had to watch when you were down there. Anyway, you got to see more classic films there, and you did see a lot of the Universal films from the 30s and 40s. And even some Hammer stuff. The first Hammer films I ever saw were at that Grindhouse Theater, there in Bay City. And incredibly cheap and terrific entertainment. Way better than you were going to find anywhere else, as far as I was concerned. I kind of got hooked on things like that, and even as a child, I used to seek out even with comedy. I loved W.C. Fields, Laurel and Hardy. Ben Turpin, Charlie Chase, all of the early Keystone Cops. You used to be able to see a lot of the 2-reelers on TV when I was a kid that were sold into syndication packages. People, unfortunately, there's no way to expose people to that now. There's just entertainment out there in general, and people consume what of it they want. But it doesn't expose anybody to older films. I was talking to a guy I used to work with at the university. He's about 20 years younger than I am, so he's a millennial and I'm Generation X. And the types of movies that he likes, he's very fond of, but he hasn't seen anything prior to that. So he hasn't really seen anything before, let's say, 1985. So he has absolutely no idea, where these tropes came from in, let's say, romantic comedies or horror films. He has absolutely no idea. And I keep telling him, you need to go, you watch some of the older films. Don't be afraid of something black and white. And he never does it.
Well, also this is more important too. During those days, in the early days of television, they actually had live action dramas on TV, not just soap operas. I mean, like Captain Video, sci-fi during the week. You'd see 15 minutes of Captain Video filled with lots of commercials around it, trying to sell you various types of merchandise with your favorite cereal or something. And then there'd be a cliffhanger until the next episode. Now, remember, this was done live. The special effects were done live. But worse, when the Dumont network on which it was broadcast failed in, 1955,
right?
They had copies of the episodes, I guess, on kinescope, which is basically taking a camera and shooting it off the TV tube. Problem was that they were all thrown away. Only a handful of episodes of Captain Video survive.
And that's a shame about Dumont too. Initially Dumont was poised to be the front runner, of all the networks, but especially with the equipment tie-in, because you had your Dumont local Dumont station, and I lived near Pittsburgh, so KDKA, which is the first radio station, was one of the early Dumont stations as well, from about 1947, 1948, something like that. Dumont had the television tie-in where they could sell sets and things. They just didn't have the entertainers, really, and I think that was their biggest problem. NBC, you already had. They had radio shows lined up that already had, name recognition with audiences. It was easy just to scoot a lot of those over to, television in the early 50s. Dumont didn't have that, and to know that all that entertainment that people slaved over. These are artists. These aren't just workaday people that just got dumped into the river. It's just heartbreaking to hear things like that.
We've got a lot more with Brian Walker, the drive-in guy, Tim Swartz, Gene Steinberg. We are exploring entertainment of years ago, entertainment you could still see on YouTube and some of the free channels because it's worth it. You're in
the Paracast.
We are audiostack.ai.
Combining AI writing, the best synthetic voices,
with production and delivery.
Be it ads, podcasts, or VOs for video.
Just like this ad.
How would you utilize AI audio? For free.
Go to audiostack.ai/contest.
Give us just a few details.
And you could replace this spot and be heard by millions.
See webpage for T's and C's. audiostack.ai/contest.
Inside every California avocado is a story. It's shaped by idyllic conditions, full of rich soil, gentle rain, and friendly California sunshine, where avocados flourish. Crafted with care by dedicated local farmers who are committed to responsible, sustainable growing. The best avocados have California in them. To understand why, all you have to do is open one up. In season now. Visit CaliforniaAvocado.com to learn more.
This is Jacques Vallée. You're listening to the Paracast, the gold standard of paranormal radio.
Interesting about Captain Video. Basically, three people play Captain Video. Judd Holdren in the movie. Al Hodge being the last person to play Captain Video. He was a former radio actor and announcer, and he was also best known for being one of the actors that played Britt Reed, the Green Hornet, on TV. And I can tell you the story about the Green Hornet because he was related to the Lone Ranger, a distant relative. But anyway, so after Captain Video went off the air because Dumont failed, he would introduce Saturday morning cartoons. And towards the end of his life, he was living in a low-end hotel in New York. practically broke. Very sad. But on the other hand, the young actor who played his sidekick, the video ranger Don Hastings, still alive, by the way, he became famous for daytime soap operas.
And you could, unfortunately, a lot of soap opera footage no longer exists too. So a lot of that stuff, it might have even been, just shot live, and I'm sure they kinescoped it, but all of that disappears. And I hate that too. It's fascinating to go back and watch early television programming. And as you pointed out, you can see a lot of it on archive.org or YouTube. Unfortunately, since a lot of it is in the form of kinescope, a lot of that 16 millimeter stock gets scratched and breaks down. It'd be interesting to see it if artificial intelligence can't clean up some of those old broadcasts and make them sharper. But you are right. You can watch a lot of that stuff either on. You can see a lot of old programming from the 50s on the game show networks like GSN and Buzzer. They will occasionally show the old kinescoped black and white Price is Rights from the mid-50s, hosted by Bill Cullen. Maybe some old episodes of Password with Alan Ludden. All the black and white ones. And they're fascinating documents to watch, but you also get to see the rotating celebrities, the people who come through. Password's really impressive. They had people like Carol Baker and Jane Fonda. And Carol Baker, of course, at this point was on her way down. Jane Fonda was on her way up. But just to see them relaxing or playing a game was fun. One of those I like best, it's actually you don't see that many of, is called Stump the Stars what was his name? Dan Clokey? Oh, golly, I can't remember the host's name. But they had a regular assortment of their panelists. One of them was Beverly Garland. Dinah Dors was a regular for a while. Sebastian Cabot from Checkmate and Family Affair. Hans Conried, a few other people. And then they would bring in one guest star, such as, let's say, like Julie London and Michael Landon or something like that. Nick Adams was on it several times too. It's fun to see, celebrities in this old game show programming because you're not seeing them perform so much. You're seeing, more of them, glimpse into them that you didn't ordinarily see. You're watching them play a game, essentially. It's kind of fun.
Speaking of games, there was a show called Beat the Clock, which you did.
Bud Collyer.
Right. Now, Clayton Bud Collyer was famous in radio as one of the earliest or possibly the earliest actors to play Superman. And he got the part in a way I think that influenced Christopher Reeve, where you have Clark Kent with this nerdy, high-pitched voice, and then he says, "This is a job for Superman." And of course, you can't see Superman flying, so he'd use the magic words, up, up, and away.
Another interesting tie-in with game shows, with the Superman cartoons, Superman and Clark Kent were voiced by Bud Collyer, is that Joan Alexander, who portrayed Lois Lane in the cartoons, was a regular panelist for 5 or 6 years on an ABC game show called The Name's the Same, which was hosted by Robert Q. Lewis. And she stuck around on the show for the entire run. I mean, the other panelists would rotate off, but she was on for the whole run. And she did mostly radio and television. I don't know that she ever made an actual film. She married well the second time around and was able to retire. She married a kind of a wealthy doctor, but she still kept up the voice work on the Superman cartoons. So I just thought that was an interesting game show tie-in.
Compare that, of course, to Noel Neill, who played Lois Lane in the movie serials as the second person to play Lois Lane on Adventures of Superman. She had no career after that. She just had to work kind of conventional jobs or things like that. No career. Jack Larson was so good and so well known as Jimmy Olsen, he eventually just got into producing plays. Except he'd occasionally appear in a notable way in a Superman film. So, for example, the Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman series, Jimmy Olsen gets old because of this drug or something, and the old guy is Jack Larson. In Superman Returns, with Brandon Routh as Superman, the film from 2006, they have Jack Larson playing the bartender.
With Noel Neill, if you take a look at her career, she had a lot of near misses, to tell you the truth. In her filmography, she did a lot of programmers for Monogram in the 1940s. Now, there are good ways, say what you will about Monogram's movies. They were good ways to, at least work, and, hone your craft and do a better job. And she spent a whole lot of time in those in the 40s. Even into her late 20s, she was still making these teenage movies like College Queen, for example, or Junior Prom. Yeah, Noel Neill made a lot of teenage kind of films that were to appeal to a teenage audience back then. They didn't, but that was the intention anyway. And she was, into her late 20s and was still making a lot of these. She just never, in a way, she would get breaks, but it just never was enough, And I don't know. Sometimes those are just the breaks, in life. You only get so far. Maybe she lost interest in it. I don't really know what happened to her career. I mean, she worked, quite a bit, even if she wasn't credited. And certainly I would think she could have worked more in television, if nothing else. I mean, movies were kind of rough after a while into the 50s. Even the big stars were having to take, lesser, smaller paychecks, I'm trying to say, after the studio system broke up. And, that might explain it. Maybe the breakup of the studio system squeezed people like her out.
Also, if you look at some of the male stars in the movie serials, very few of them had much of a career. Like I said, George D. Wallace went on for years as a character actor. Judd Holdren didn't do much after Commando Cody. He had small bit parts and eventually took his life. He was a guy in his 50s. Richard Crane died young. He was Rocky Jones' Space Ranger, but also the sidekick in some of the episodes of Commando Cody's Sky Marshal of the Universe. So he didn't hang out long. So that's kind of some of the things you see in these films. Of course, on the other hand, Leonard Nimoy appearing in Radar Men from the Moon. Clayton Moore, of course, although the Lone Ranger typecast him forever.
True. And, that there were so few breakout stars in the serials, I think you can really attribute to the fact that after a while, mostly two studios made the serials, Republic and Universal. And Universal being the more moneyed of the studios, even though they made their serials just as cheaply as Republic did. They probably had better access to better talent, however, at Universal. And I think that they did just pick, you only had, let's say the director, you only had so much to spend on the entire 4-hour project. You probably had to grab whoever was cheap, but you knew who would show up, and stand on their marks and then say their lines. So I don't think you didn't really see the bigger studios that had more recognized talent didn't really make serials. I think that's why you didn't really see any big names.
We'll have more with Brian, Gene, and Tim. You're in
the Paracast.
We are audiostack.ai.
Combining AI writing, the best synthetic voices,
with production and delivery.
Be it ads, podcasts, or VOs for video.
Just like this ad.
How would you utilize AI audio? For free.
Go to audiostack.ai/contest.
Give us just a few details.
And you could replace this spot and be heard by millions.
See webpage for T's and C's. audiostack.ai/contest.
Welcome to the Scottsdale Unified School District, where every student is empowered to thrive in an ever-changing world. Enrollment is now open for the upcoming school year, toddlers through 12th grade. Check out our signature offerings such as gifted, STEM, IB, dual language, and dual enrollment, along with award-winning arts and athletics. Join an amazing network where parents and guardians actively participate in their children's educational journey. Scottsdale Unified School District, where your child's future begins. Learn more at susd.org.
We'd like to hear from you. If you have a comment or question about the Paracast, send it to news@theparacast.com. That's news@theparacast.com. And don't forget to visit our famous Paracast community forums at forum.theparacast.com.
There was also a thing here back in the early days of TV where you thought TV was really a dead end for an actor. I guess George Reeves felt that way. He became most famous for anything he'd ever done on TV. But TV, how many people on TV became big stars? Okay, Lucille Ball was someone who came from the movies to television, but it didn't always happen. By the way, speaking of characters from serials, one of the Universal serials from the early 40s was The Green Hornet, which was like an introductory film where you learn how he becomes the Green Hornet. And the actor who played him was a fellow named Gordon Jones. And every time he put on the Green Hornet's mask, his voice would deepen, and I always thought, is that somebody dubbing the voice? It'd be interesting to find out. Gordon Jones, by the way, is also infamous on the Abbott and Costello TV show. He played Mike the Cop, who was always the foil for the Abbott and Costello antics. The Green Hornet. That was an interesting film one way, too, where Cato, his trusty valet, played by a guy named K. Luke, he was shown to be a smart guy, not subservient to the Green Hornet. He was an inventor, invented a lot of the stuff, gadgets that he used, spoke very well. And one of the few times when you saw somebody being really injured in a crash with a car in a garage, I think it blows up or something, and you see a scene where he's in bed and you see Britt Reed, the Green Hornet, tending to his wounds. And you could see, bruises on his hand. That was one of the few films I recall in terms of movie serials where you saw actually someone getting injured and being aided to recover and showing symptoms of what he suffered.
And a more realistic portrayal of somebody from the Asian community as well. A lot of films at the time, if they did have an Asian, and this was pre-World War II, into World War II, that became way worse. But they were very stilted Asian types that you saw mostly in films. But you're right. Kay Luke's performance, it was lines in The Green Hornet are much more sympathetically painted than you typically found. And I've watched the TV series with Bruce Lee and Van Williams. I've seen all 20 whatever episodes there were. It was good to see that Bruce Lee was able to carry that tradition on. And he and Van Williams were good friends anyway. They became good friends while working together. And you could see that bond on TV. Even in the episodes that were quickly shot, you could tell that they had a pretty good chemistry, a good connection.
I also understand early in the series, he tended to be more of a traditional Asian type, which, of course, was not very favorable. And then they made him a more intelligent character. The character developed over the course of the series, which was very good. Instead of the stereotype Asian, very good. But also, it's interesting how Asians were portrayed in the movies because not all the actors who played Asians were Chinese or Japanese or Asian. One of the famous horror actors, Boris Karloff, played a Fu Manchu kind of role. Warner Oland, who was definitely not Asian, played Charlie Chan in many movies.
Christopher Lee also had similar roles, and they just used really heavy makeup in order to convey that. And with Boris Karloff and Christopher Lee, I'll give him a pass because if you're employing them, you want somebody who's very tall and imposing and sinister. So I get it, but but it is I can see where it would be insulting. At the same time, when you see Katharine Hepburn, doing it, it's just sort of kind of shocking and doesn't play very well, quite honestly.
Warner Oland, by the way, was from Sweden.
Yes.
And unfortunately, he died not very old age, in his late 50s. He was 58, and he died in 1938, not many years after he appeared in A Werewolf of London, where he was more or less the villain.
Warner Oland, didn't he have a really serious drinking problem, as I recall? I was thinking he had.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah. Unfortunately, I've known several people who have drunk themselves to death, and I hate reading that in these stories. You think that these people have it made because we go back and look at their careers and we're really impressed by their performances, but to find out that they were essentially functioning alcoholics, I guess it really lends something to watching their performances. However, how bad they must have been hungover, for a particular role, and to get through it and to make it look easy, to make it look good. I guess that's talent.
Now, one of the reasons cited by Phyllis Coates for not appearing in any more seasons for Adventures of Superman, she said there was a lot of drinking on the set.
Was that Phyllis, or?
I assume she's talking about other people. I don't know. I know that George Reeves supposedly drank a lot. I don't think he ever did that in public appearances or anything. But I think there were times there where he was just barely getting through his lines. So who knows?
Well, but in the early 1950s, he would have been late 30s.
Correct.
He was probably just enjoying it. Why not go out and have a good time? Now, I'm not saying you should do anything to excess, but 50s. This was the 1950s. That was the cocktail era. You were supposed to have a 2-martini lunch back then. We know better than that now because we know that that'll kill you eventually. But back then, he was a bachelor. He'd just gotten divorced, around 1950 or so. Great looking guy, had a TV series. Hey, why not enjoy it? The hedonistic part of it for a couple of years. I sure would.
Well, didn't the guy who played Perry White, wasn't he also a pretty heavy drinker?
Oh, you can see the gin blossoms even in the black and white episodes on John Hamilton. Yeah, he's pretty pickled.
Great Caesar's Ghost. By the way, he died after the last season of Superman was filmed. They went ahead and hired the guy to replace him who played Perry White in the movie serials. Except that guy died a year later. Of course, they never got a chance to film more Superman episodes because of the death of George Reeves. But the guy, like I said, who was going to replace the late John Hamilton himself died.
That's the story of George Reeves. That's kind of heartbreaking too. If you read the background on that, we'll never know what happened because anybody who would have known long since died, unfortunately. But it's a really sad story if you think about it. And knowing that it was going to go back into production, you would think that would have probably lifted his spirits. So I'm not sure I really believe the suicide thing either. But who knows? He could have been manic depressive. We didn't have a lot of diagnoses for psychological issues like we do now. So who knows what was going on with him.
I always thought him committing suicide just before he was to direct episodes and he was excited about the next season coming up. That just never set well with me.
No, I agree. And I don't see George Reeves as a Pete Duell either. So I've always wondered if Tony Mannix didn't have him whacked, because he stopped seeing her. She was the meal ticket too, and he got his house and his convertible. So I guess he was good after a while. But apparently she did not take it well, being spurned, and she had enough money to hire somebody to whack him. So I just wonder. And back then, to do a good job, you just had to pay more.
We've got plenty more with Brian, Gene, Tim. You're in
The Paracast.
We are audiostack.ai.
Combining AI writing, the best synthetic voices,
with production and delivery.
Be it ads, podcasts, or VOs for video.
Just like this ad.
How would you utilize AI audio? For free.
Go to audiostack.ai/contest.
Give us just a few details.
And you could replace this spot and be heard by millions.
See webpage for T's and C's. audiostack.ai/contest.
Welcome to the Scottsdale Unified School District, where every student is empowered to thrive in an ever-changing world. Enrollment is now open for the upcoming school year, toddlers through 12th grade. Check out our signature offerings such as gifted, STEM, IB, dual language, and dual enrollment, along with award-winning arts and athletics. Join an amazing network where parents and guardians actively participate in their children's educational journey. Scottsdale Unified School District, where your child's future begins. Learn more at susd.org.
This is Jennifer Stein, executive producer of The Disclosure Dialogues. You're listening to The Paracast, the gold standard of paranormal radio.
Up, up, and away we go. We're talking here about George Reeves. Ben Affleck portrayed him in a movie. That was kind of interesting because it does kind of continue the conspiracy of what happened to George Reeves. We've got Brian, Gene, and Tim. Let us continue. Brian?
I really liked Ben Affleck's performance as George Reeves. I thought he did a good job. He certainly had the look. Well, and they have similar, cranial structures anyway. They have that firm jaw, kind of a square head. But I thought Ben Affleck did a great job, in that role. And roughly the same age, too. They didn't get somebody younger to portray a 45-year-old man. They got somebody who was, about 40, 45. And like I said, really good performance. Ben Affleck's one of the few actors that I actually keep up with, contemporary, I guess I should say, actors that I still keep up with. And he usually does turn in a pretty good performance. Sometimes it's a little low-key, but that's better than chewing on the scenery and camping it up. For him, anyway. Now, for some actors, you want to see them do that.
We were talking earlier about Caucasian actors playing Asian roles, and it makes me think of Peter Sellers playing
Murder by Death is one of my favorite movies. Oh, I love it.
I think that was one of the last movies that they actually allowed somebody to play an Asian character.
Well, but that movie's so politically incorrect that it's just, and I'm all about political correctness, but it's so politically incorrect now that it's just a riot. They offend everybody in it. and if you can sort of get a pass from me if you're just sort of broad in your sarcasm and hatred for. In your misanthropic ways. Let me just put it that way.
As far as I'm concerned, that Peter Sellers could play any character, any race, and that would be fine with me.
He was disturbed but really brilliant, and just one fabulous performance after another with Peter Sellers. But his role in Murder by Death, he is just brilliant, and it is so funny. And Truman Capote is awesome. I find myself wishing that he had done more in the way of film, because he's maybe has the strongest performance in the whole movie.
I'm trying to think what else did Truman Capote do movie-wise?
He used to be on The Tonight Show a lot when I was a kid.
Yeah, I saw him on The Tonight Show, but I'm trying to think of other movies.
He was really good friends with Johnny Carson's third wife, Joanne. Okay. I think that was her name. Right. Because he had a couple of Joannes or Joannas or whatever. I think it was Joanne. And he used to be on The Tonight Show because it was. I think he was always at the Carson house, so it made sense just to bring him on, no matter how smashed he was, and bring him on the show. But after Johnny and Joanne or Joanna, whichever wife it was, split up in the late 70s or early 80s, you never saw him on again. What a shame, too. The Tonight Show. I used to love. Fortunately, I had really permissive parents, so I used to love staying up every night and watching it. And you would see some of these celebrities come on who were just hammered, like George Gobel, who's kind of mild and meek. God, he must have drank a fifth a night. I mean, it's just smashed. Funny as hell, though. I mean, well, I don't know if we were laughing with him or at him at that point, but it was just amazing to see that. You would, if you had a drunk celebrity on something now, there would be an intervention or something like that. Back then, it was just good old clean fun.
It was almost expected sometimes, especially, like with the Carson show or something like that late at night.
Or somebody who just picked up the affect, like Dean Martin, who wasn't really, he might have been an alcoholic, but he wasn't as drunk as, he would try to come off, especially in the roasts, from time to time. It was just his shtick. Almost like Foster Brooks was, back in the day. But you would see some people come on the Tonight Show, and they were just, 2/3 of the way into a bottle of Jack, and just and riotously funny or incredibly hateful. Either way, it made for great television. You don't get to see things like that now.
I understand Johnny Carson could put a few away too.
Oh, I would imagine so. Well, but that, going back to the 50s and 60s, that was just kind of the culture back then. I think if you had reached a certain time of life and a certain level of success, you were expected to have a cocktail in the evening. I think I'm glad. Well, I don't think I'm glad what we've hopefully moved on past encouraging people to develop alcohol addiction problems. But in the 50s and 60s, it just seemed to be a way to celebrate life. I guess, the Depression and World War II, that had to have been terrible to have lived through. Imagine living through your entire childhood only knowing, a hardship and having to go without. How horrible that must have been, and for so long. So I guess the 50s and 60s were all about making up for the 30s and 40s.
Well, it was the alcohol consumption and smoking as well.
Hey, they go hand in hand. I used to be a smoker, and they go hand in hand too. There is nothing better in terms of cigarettes than the first morning cigarette of the day with a cup of coffee, or if you're out at a bar or something like that, ordering, let's say, a gin and tonic and then lighting one up. Now, I haven't smoked in more than 25 years. So I'm not advocating for, picking up a $15 pack of cigarettes, which is insane. But I think it actually has, helped people quit smoking. So.
Yeah, but you look at these old shows, and again, like the Tonight Show, and there was a certain period where everyone was smoking.
Oh, yeah. Well, and people, if you had somebody like Betty Davis on, she had a cigarette in each hand. So
I don't remember that.
Well, you can't really see the one hand because there's just this plume of smoke around her. But yeah, and you could never do anything like the Carson show now. But it would be a great idea for a reality series, just every week. Put, let's say, 5 celebrities, or we'll say B-list celebrities, in a green room with, let's say, a bottle of gin, a bottle of scotch, a bottle of vodka, and maybe some rum or something like that, and just watch them tear into each other after a while. I think it would be great cinema. It would be awesome. Paramount Plus should thank me for that.
Well, they kind of do something similar to that show called Hot Ones. I don't know. Have you ever seen that?
No, I haven't seen it, but I'm aware of it.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's after a while, after the hot sauces start to get to people, it really does break down a lot of the walls, that these actors or singers have. And they'll spill their guts more after the capation. Yeah, the hot sauces, deteriorated that frontal cortex of their brain a bit.
Well, there's a series on the World of Wonder app that I watch. It's called Tongue Tied, Pangina Heals, and it's all about Pangina going to Los Angeles area Thai restaurants, and she brings one of her friends or a celebrity with her, and they eat progressively hotter food at these Thai places. And it's sort of a game show in that you accumulate points, and you can use some of your points to buy relief in the form of, let's say antacids, milk, things that'll, take the heat out of your mouth, sugar. And it's fun to watch, and it's kind of fun just to see people's reactions to the ridiculously hot Thai food that they're eating. And some of them can take it too, no matter how hot it is. I mean, you can tell that they're a little, discomforted by the heat, but they can still take it.
We have to take a break, and we're going to break things up now for a second. Take a deep breath, everybody. Brian, Tim, and Gene exploring the amazing stories of yesteryear. You're in
the Paracast.
We are audiostack.ai.
Combining AI writing, the best synthetic voices,
with production and delivery.
Be it ads, podcasts, or VOs for video.
Just like this ad.
How would you utilize AI audio? For free.
Go to audiostack.ai/contest.
Give us just a few details.
And you could replace this spot and be heard by millions.
See webpage for T's and C's. audiostack.ai/contest.
At Sleep Outfitters Outlet, great sleep is a big deal. Save 40 to 60% every day on every Sealy and every Stearns & Foster. Queens as low as $249. Customer exchanges, closeouts, and floor samples. Inventory changes daily. So come in for your dream deal today. With no credit needed financing, expert advice, and up to 60% off retail, it's never been easier to get the sleep and savings you deserve. Go to sleepoutfittersoutlet.com for financing details and to find a store near you.
Hey, this is Marie D. Jones, the author of This Book is from the Future, and you are listening to the Paracast, the gold standard of paranormal radio.
Earlier I was mentioning the Green Hornet, Britt Reed, and remember the name Reed, because this is, of course, it was produced by the same people who produced The Lone Ranger. Of course, The Lone Ranger is a 19th century character. So how do they work this out? Well, the Green Hornet appeared in the late 30s or early 40s, and he was the grand nephew of John Reed, the Lone Ranger. John Reed's nephew, Dan, who you saw on the TV show, grows up and has a child. He becomes wealthy, runs a newspaper. He has a child, Britt Reed. That's how you have the connection. Of course, now, who cares?
The old Green Hornet television series, the ABC series from the 60s, is really fascinating to watch. They cast the series pretty well, and unfortunately, it got overshadowed by Batman. And it wasn't really in the same vein as Batman. Batman was all very tongue-in-cheek and extremely well done, in terms of that kind of series where you're just nudging and winking, at the audience with great campy performances by a lot of the guest stars. And it's fun to see people like Cesar Romero, who had been, Latin leads in the 40s, camping it up like crazy on this show, and just relishing every second of the performance and every line. And the Green Hornet was very different, and I kind of wondered if what affected it was the fact that it wasn't quite tongue in cheek. I like the way that it's done. I'm certainly not complaining about it, and like I said, I really like the camaraderie that you see between Britt and Kato in the series. It really their relationship personally really comes across in their performances, I think. And Wendy Wagner, as Lenore, a really great presence in some 60s TV shows and movies. And another one who passed away really early. I think she was maybe 55, 56 when she passed away. Not very old.
Well, and Batman started the whole television superhero comedic shows that lasted for a while. You had like Captain Nice, Mr. Terrific are the two that I can remember. And probably most people have no memories of those at all.
And I'm one of them. So I don't remember those at all.
Both of them lasted like maybe a season. So it's no wonder. Yeah. But I mean, I was a kid at the time, and those were my staples. You know, that Batman, Lost in Space, Green Hornet.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what was it? Captain Nice had, oh gosh, what's the guy's name? I think he's still alive. He played the teacher in was it Boy Meets World? He was in the musical 1776.
Williams?
Yes. He was the main character. He was the superhero.
I used to love him on St. Elsewhere. And,
that's the guy.
That's what I identify him. I know he's done things before that and after. And I see that Anne Prentice was in this. Well, that she's was an interesting one. She was Paula Prentice's sister. And if I recall right, she tried to have Richard Benjamin rubbed out.
I don't remember that one.
I mean, I understand, hating the in-laws, but damn,
That's some pretty major hatred there.
Yeah, according to IMDb, she spent the rest of her years in prison when she was convicted in June of 1997 of assaulting her 86-year-old father, and then later tried to hire somebody to kill her father, her brother-in-law, Richard Benjamin, and his son, Ross Benjamin. That must have been an awkward Christmas.
Now, there's somebody who obviously had some issues.
Or a plan.
Well, I guess not a very well thought out one.
Yeah,
if she ended up in prison.
A better job, right? You
that's right.
You have to spend more money on your hitman or your hit person, I should say. You can't cheap out on that. You got to trust this person. So you either have to do it yourself or spend a whole lot of money and hire somebody good. Hire a pro.
Yeah, now that's a story that, and maybe it has been, I don't know, that should have been in one of the Hollywood Babylon, books.
Well, but I mean, it came about kind of late in the whole, everything today is a celebrity scandal. It's really dull. Back then, they were nice and juicy like this. I mean, that story alone would have sold tons of copies of the Inquirer. It's fascinating to hear something like that. I mean, apparently, I'm not making fun of Anne Prentice at all. Apparently, she was very deeply disturbed. She must have been.
No, really?
But notice she wasn't trying to kill random people. It was just people she was related to somehow. And did you ever see Diary of a Mad Housewife?
Oh, yes.
Well, I've always pictured Richard Benjamin at home as his character in that movie. So if he is truly that annoying, I'll give Anne a pass on him.
Well, I mean, and I don't. And probably when this all happened, I wasn't following the gossip sheets, but this would have been the type of story that if it had happened in the heyday of the big studios, would have been probably pretty efficiently covered up.
Well, I mean, it hopefully and tastefully, hopefully.
Yeah.
Imagine being a fix-it man or a fix-it person, I should say, for let's say MGM Studios in the 30s or 40s.
Yeah.
That would have been tough, but imagine the compensation. I bet they paid those people a fortune. You have to get the best, and the best. Yeah. So you want the sleaziest, slimiest, most knowledgeable attorneys on your side too.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you'd have to have people who had it in with the police departments.
Right. Yeah. Like I said, it costs a lot of money. You got to have some greenbacks in your hand to grease those palms so you can get favors done. I've seen all those 30s and 40s movies. I know how this works.
I wanted to ask though, talking about these old movies, because I've been watching quite a bit of the pre-code movies.
Oh, those are fascinating.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of people don't understand that concept. Because most of us have grown up with, G, PG and RX types of ratings. But there was a time when movies got away with, even more stuff than they're doing now.
Well, certainly for that era, in the 1920s, mores became more relaxed, and by the early 30s, with the onset of the Great Depression, I think that mores changed that much more, and obviously, art, what's the word I'm looking for? Entertainment, that is, not just art. Reflected that as well. And if you watch some of the early code films, which you weren't going to see on TV 50 years ago, because they did involve some pretty and now I guess for some people scandalous topics, sleeping around. I can't remember the name of the Barbara Stanwyck film, but there's a film a pre-code film that she's in, where she more or less just sleeps her way to the top of the company. And there are no ifs, ands, or buts about it. That's exactly what she's doing, and she's banging everybody on every floor to get to the top. and when you see something like that now, and knowing what you have, the stuff that you've seen from that era, which is pretty sanitized and kind of melodramatic, only to see these people having very modern, problems and motivations. It's just really fascinating to see those, and some really good actors in those movies too. And Babyface.
I've got more with Brian, Gene, Tim. You're in
the Paracast.
We are audiostack.ai.
Combining AI writing, the best synthetic voices,
with production and delivery.
Be it ads, podcasts, or VOs for video.
Just like this ad.
How would you utilize AI audio? For free.
Go to audiostack.ai/contest.
Give us just a few details.
And you could replace this spot and be heard by millions.
See webpage for T's and C's. audiostack.ai/contest.
At Sleep Outfitters Outlet, great sleep is a big deal. Save 40 to 60% every day on every Sealy and every Stearns & Foster. Queens as low as $249. Customer exchanges, closeouts, and floor samples. Inventory changes daily. So come in for your dream deal today. With no credit needed financing, expert advice, and up to 60% off retail, it's never been easier to get the sleep and savings you deserve. Go to sleepoutfittersoutlet.com for financing details and to find a store near you.
Hi, this is Bryce Abel. I'm the producer of Dark Skies, the co-author of AD After Disclosure, and you are listening to the Paracast, the gold standard of paranormal radio.
Indeed. We are here trying to make the world change. We're change the world right now with drive-in movies.
And pre-code Hollywood. The movie that I was talking about where Barbara Stanwyck sleeps her way to the top is Babyface. Mm-hmm. And when you watch the film, I'd heard about it for years, but it was just so impossible to get a copy of. And finally, a lot of those pre-code films, about 15 or so years ago, were released to DVD. And every once in a while, you'll see one on Turner Classic Movies. But Babyface is really kind of shocking, in a way. Here's Barbara Stanwyck. And if you think about Barbara Stanwyck, her career overall, you might think about, Big Valley, or even some of the, films that she did in, like Stella Dallas. What's the Double Indemnity? That's probably my favorite Barbara Stanwyck movie. But to see her in this, and she's very young, very sensual, beautiful. And to see her, more or less just sort of peddling herself to socially advance and to make more money. it's kind of interesting to watch. I mean, not that we all haven't done that maybe from time to time, but to have it documented and to know that this was more than 90 years ago, and it's a very, what we think maybe think of as a very modern set of issues, actually is not. And it's a great film to watch. If you haven't seen Babyface with Barbara Stanwyck, do so. I like Barbara Stanwyck a lot. And another one of my favorites in a lot of pre-code films is Ricardo Cortez. Very handsome guy, born into the ghetto in New York, and did everything in his power to erase the fact that he was born into the ghetto in New York, including changing his name. He was Jewish, but when he got to Hollywood, and he, like I said, a very handsome man, just by virtue of changing his name, became, sort of a Latin lover in the same vein as Rudolph Valentino. There again, very, very suave, sophisticated, handsome guy. Kind of easy to see that, but apparently his first wife, who was the tragic actress Alma Rubens, who had a really bad drug habit, which is essentially what killed her. She had no idea he was Jewish until about 6 or 7 months after they got married.
Oh gosh.
Well, I guess he thought that he needed to, keep his background, hidden as much as possible in order to continue the whole Latin lover persona. I mean, I'm not saying that it's right, but I think I understand, the motivation. He was a pretty big star in the late 1920s. And he moved, from, kind of Rudolph Valentino-esque type films into a lot of the racier pre-code stuff. Kept his career going, and he was very good at it. He's a really good cad. And cads really should be handsome, because otherwise, why would you buy into, just the usual, junk? Would junk work there?
Junk is fine.
Okay, well, we'll just go with that. Garbage, crap, something like that. Sorry, I'll keep it clean.
Now this, folks, is where I begin to take a back seat, because they are dealing with stuff here I did not pay very much attention to, such as pre-code films and all that stuff. So let's continue. We're all learning something new.
But Ricardo Cortez, a really interesting actor. Like his first marriage was very tragic. He was married to Alma Rubens, and apparently he had absolutely no idea that she had, a serious drug problem until after they got married, and he stuck with her as long as he could, So apparently it's nice to find out that some of these people are stand-up individuals like he was. His career kind of stalled after the pre-code movies. He kept wearing out genres. The Latin lover type, it eclipsed. Pre-code films, that got shut down, in 1934, so you couldn't do anything very racy after that. And he just kind of relegated him to B programmers after that. It's a shame too, because he really had some promise, and but briefly, a big name, a big star.
Well, do you know, was there any particular film that made the whole coding process then take place, or was it just things just accumulation?
Well, I think some of it was accumulation, and I do think that there were people like Mae West, and if anybody influenced it, it would have been her, because I do think that some people wanted to silence her. I think she was seen as too independent, maybe too brazen for the time. And I mean, the things that we love about her now, I think that she was sometimes hated for back then. And she did push the envelope, but that's the whole point. You can't be milquetoast Mae West. I mean, you've got to keep pushing it. You know what I mean? And I do think some of it was really aimed at her. And the popularity that she had. I think that's what scared some people back then, is that she was so popular, and people loved her, audiences loved her, and I think that they worried that she was this threat to mores and such. And obviously not. But a fascinating person nonetheless. And very, very intelligent too. A really good writer. Very quick-witted as well. Fascinating person.
Well, when you were talking about Mae West, it made me think of a short that W.C. Fields did called The Dentist. Are you familiar with that one?
It's public domain too. Yes.
Yeah. Well, but I mean, you watch that, and that had to have been pre-code, I think, because I can't imagine that any theater after that would run that. It's just a little suggestive, maybe.
It's a lot suggestive, but it's also it's beautifully choreographed too. That had to have taken some time to set up, and I'm sure that was Fields, because he might have been an alcoholic, but he was a perfectionist, and he wasn't going to do anything slipshod.
No,
and you can see that in all of his performances. I mean, he came up through vaudeville and was very, very good at what he did. I'm a huge W.C. Fields fan. Anyway, always have been. He had a resurgence in popularity when I was a child in the early 1970s. And every week, for a while, you could watch a W.C. Fields movie. And I was just fascinated by how crusty this man was, but hilarious at the same time. And there was a lot of product that you could buy in the stores at the time. I had a huge 6-foot-tall grass mat that had a picture of W.C. Fields silk screened on it that was hanging in my bedroom. I had a couple of albums. I had mugs, puzzles. They were all W.C. Fields. Oh, and I had the bar statuary, the chalk stuff from the early 70s that was popular. My parents were indulgent enough, and I was a big enough fan of those movies to buy me some. So I've got the Laurel and Hardy chalk sculptures, W.C. Fields. Still have them, by the way, and the Marx Brothers, where you have Harpo, Groucho, and Chico all on the pole together. I used to see that programming routinely on television, especially on rainy Saturdays and late nights, Friday and Saturday nights. It exposed me to a lot of those old movies, old serials, those old comedians. And it's a shame that I don't think people get that exposure anymore. W.C. Fields, unfortunately, I think is largely forgotten these days.
You can still see the Marx Brothers, but W.C. Fields movies, I haven't seen one in years.
Oh, it's a long time. Abbott and Costello made it, however. They seem to have endured. And the Three Stooges, I think they're as popular now as they ever were, perhaps.
Perhaps we should break here. With Brian, Gene, Tim, you're in
The Paracast.
We are audiostack.ai.
Combining AI writing, the best synthetic voices,
with production and delivery.
Be it ads, podcasts, or VOs for video.
Just like this ad.
How would you utilize AI audio? For free.
Go to audiostack.ai/contest.
Give us just a few details.
And you could replace this spot and be heard by millions.
See webpage for T's and C's. audiostack.ai/contest.
At Sleep Outfitters Outlet, great sleep is a big deal. Save 40 to 60% every day on every Sealy and every Stearns & Foster. Queens as low as $249. Customer exchanges, closeouts, and floor samples. Inventory changes daily. So come in for your dream deal today. With no credit-needed financing, expert advice, and up to 60% off retail, it's never been easier to get the sleep and savings you deserve. Go to sleepoutfittersoutlet.com for financing details and to find a store near you.
This is Big the Merciless. You are listening to the Paracast, the gold standard of paranormal radio, exactly according to my plan.
Now, with, of course, the Three Stooges, they had a couple of variations of the Curly theme because the original Curly died young.
Yeah, I mean, poor guy too. The Howard brothers, other than Moe, didn't live very long, sadly. Curly had a massive stroke when he was just in his 40s and couldn't work afterward. They would try to prop him up here and there for a scene, but he couldn't handle the role anymore after so long. After his death, they got their brother Shemp, who had been, a working actor in his own right, in the 30s and 40s. He had a lot of different roles in films. They brought him into the act, and then Shemp only lived for 3 more years, and he passed away in 1955. So they had to keep filling that role. And sadly, accurately, the original is always going to be the best. And I think the group suffered quite a bit when Curly passed away. I really do. Now, after their contract to do short subjects, I should say, ended in the late 1950s, Moe's son-in-law, Norman Maurer had married Moe Howard's daughter. He was a producer. So he managed to get them some full-length features and kept their careers going for a while. And you can still see a lot of those as well, like Have Rocket Will Travel. The Three Stooges Meet Hercules. I mean, that runs pretty frequently on Svengoolie, the MeTV horror host that airs every Saturday night. And immediately before Svengoolie, MeTV runs hours worth of the Three Stooges shorts. It's kind of fun to watch.
Now, when it comes to comedies, Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. I thought was one of the best films because they got Bela Lugosi back to play Dracula. They had Lon Chaney Jr. as, of course, the Wolfman, even though in the previous film he had been cured of his affliction and wasn't affected by the full moon anymore. But then when he meets Abbott and Costello, he grows all that hair. Glenn Strange again plays the Frankenstein monster. And at the end of the film, they're in a boat, Abbott and Costello. And they're saying, well, we don't have to worry about the monsters anymore. And you see this cigarette lighting up in midair. Mm-hmm. And Vincent you hear Price. The voice saying, I'm sorry, I missed all the fun, Vincent Price. He played in The Invisible Man Returns, where you see him without the mustache at the end of the film when he becomes visible. I thought that was just terrific. I like that as much or more than the original film with Claude Rains.
Well, gosh, Vincent Price. He was, well, not probably. He was in a number of bad films, but he never turned in a bad performance. And if the role was written badly, he would just start chewing on the scenery and camp it up. You still got a performance out of him, no matter what. Just a fascinating actor. Now, Lon Chaney Jr. Is in the film, and I like him. I think he was capable of some very good performances. Sadly, he's kind of a tragic figure, especially later on in his career. And he was always kind of prickly. He was never the happiest person on set, unfortunately. I think a lot of it was because he had reluctantly taken on his father's name instead of his own name as Creighton, and he saw that as sort of selling out. But on the other hand, it gave him a career. And he was talented in his own right. I mean, very different from his father, of course. But he did a great job here. It in all of the Universal films. And Costello Meet Frankenstein is just a brilliant, brilliant movie in so many different ways. It also airs on Svengoolie quite often. And for them to reach back and get like Glenn Strange and Bela, Lon Chaney Jr., somebody in casting was showing some attention to detail, and even the some of the ancillary characters are like Frank Ferguson. He's McDougal, the owner of the Wax Museum at the very beginning. Very very good character actors, very good types. This movie just really came together. Very well cast, very well produced, well written. It looks good too. I mean, it's shot very well. You don't always find that in some of the Universal films, but this one is classic. A fantastic movie.
Speaking of Glenn Strange, towards the end of his career, he played the bartender in Gunsmoke.
Gunsmoke, yeah. And a very physically imposing man. He was in westerns, forever. And he took over the monster role from Boris Karloff, who was getting on in years and having some physical issues. But Glenn Strange, oftentimes what we see in that universal copyrighted representation of the Frankenstein monster's face is actually his face. It's not so much Boris Karloff's.
I think he was more terrifying than Boris Karloff. Boris Karloff had this look of someone that you feel sorry for. You never felt that way about Glenn Strange as the Frankenstein monster.
No, but I think with Boris Karloff's portrayal as the monster, I think that he is looking for sympathy. I think that's what he's trying to draw out of the audience in his performance, and it does come across. You do feel sad, for at least I do when I'm watching The Bride of Frankenstein. Boris Karloff, as the Frankenstein monster, is a sympathetic character. In all three of the Frankenstein movies that he starred in, but particularly in the first one, I think he uses his eyes really well to convey kind of a sense of, to try to draw a sense of pity, out of the audience, because none of this is of his making. He's just pieced together. And forced to exist, forced to live and to be hated and hunted, as he is. I mean, no wonder he's kind of wild and wants to. He occasionally goes on a killing spree, but you kind of understand it because all of this has been done to him, and none of this is his choice. He's just sort of a victim of circumstance, and it does make him a sympathetic character.
Indeed. I like the fact that in the second film, Bride of Frankenstein, he talked.
Oh, it's brilliant. And that's such a brilliant movie, too. I mean, from beginning to end. And he does speak. And the technology had improved so much just in the 4-year time span between the 1931 and then 1935's The Bride of Frankenstein. The sound quality had gotten much better. And the image quality had improved somewhat as well, just even in that short time span. So you get a more polished feeling film, out of The Bride of Frankenstein. And to me, sequels are tough. They're usually not as good as the OG or as the original. And in this case, I'll have to make an exception to that. I think maybe The Bride of Frankenstein is a little bit better because you do see more of a human element in this dead person, and there's some broad types in all three of the films that I think are there. They're annoying, but I think that some of the supporting players are in it to be annoying, to actually humanize him maybe a little bit as well.
Well, I'll tell you what. We should mention one more character here because we'll be, of course, switching off from our main show to the After the Paracast podcast a little bit later. But we mentioned earlier where Americans or Europeans play Oriental characters, or, in one example here, the Cisco Kid. We have Duncan Ronaldo play the Cisco Kid in the movies. And on a TV series that lasted for several years in the early 50s, he was born in Romania.
Yes.
And he's playing a man who was supposedly Mexican. Why couldn't they find a Mexican actor? I would think there were plenty.
Well, especially in Southern California, you would think that there would be any host of talented Hispanic individuals who could have tackled the role. But to tell you the truth, how many of us, when we were watching this series, and this was in heavy rotation when I was a kid in syndication packages, you often saw the Cisco Kid, primarily because most of the episodes were shot in color. We've got more to come with Brian, Gene, Tim. You're in
the Paracast.
We are audiostack.ai.
Combining AI writing, the best synthetic voices,
with production and delivery.
Be it ads, podcasts, or VOs for video.
Just like this ad.
How would you utilize AI audio? For free.
Go to audiostack.ai/contest.
Give us just a few details.
And you could replace this spot and be heard by millions.
See webpage for T's and C's. audiostack.ai/contest.
Make this summer truly unforgettable with a swim spa from Bullfrog Spas. Experience the perfect blend of space for swimming, playing, and exercising, along with the ultimate relaxation provided by our exclusive Jetpack therapy system. For a limited time, save up to $5,000 and receive a complimentary swim tether kit valued over $400. Make your family exercise and relaxation dreams of a Bullfrog swim spa a reality. Special financing options also available. Visit your local Bullfrog Spas factory store today.
Bullfrog Spas. Peaceful body, peaceful mind, peaceful home.
Hi, my name is Richard Dolan. You're listening to the Paracast.
An important thing, too, here, unlike lots of films who portrayed Hispanic or Latin characters as stereotypes, the Cisco Kid was a hero, and he was respected.
And they're, again, sort of the exception to what you ordinarily found in early 1950s television programming. But you're right, it is more of a three-dimensional portrayal than you often got in other portrayals of Hispanics at the time. I think that shows like this, you don't see the Cisco Kid much anymore in reruns, which I think is kind of odd. But Duncan Ronaldo does a great job with the role. And to tell you the truth, when I was watching these as a kid, I had no idea that he was from Eastern Europe. You know, his performance was convincing enough anyway, in this case. But a really fun show, too. It's very didactic. You know, it's very black and white, even though it was shot in color. But, you know, and it was primarily aimed at children. So you do find, you know, didactic programming, you know, for children quite often. Either things are good or things are bad. You know, there's nothing in between.
What happened to Duncan Ronaldo? Did he have a career beyond Cisco Kid because he played it for so long?
Not to my knowledge. I think, as a matter of fact, I think that was sort of the swan song, you know, of his career. I don't think he worked as an actor after that. I'm not sure if he just stayed at home and collected checks or what. He didn't have any kind of visible means of support past, let's say he was 50 or 51. So he must have invested wisely. And there's not a whole lot of information about Duncan Ronaldo, you know, after, you know, post, I should say, Cisco Kid. At the time, he was compensated pretty well. You know, television in the early days, and this show came on in 1950. It was still a little more than experimental. You know, they were sort of still feeling their way around in terms of programming. And he was making, I don't know, probably like $500 or $600 an episode, something like that. And that was, you know, big money for television back then, for somebody who wasn't, you know, perhaps such an established star, you know. I mean, certainly, you know, a working actor, but not, you know, a big name. But yeah, he must have apparently did very well for himself because he was able to live, you know, for the rest of his life fairly comfortably and not having to work. If you ask me, Duncan Ronaldo is a win.
And for a 1950s television show, I mean, it was shot on film.
Right.
And like you said, in color. So, I mean, we're able to see it today if somebody was actually showing it. And considering that predominantly most television shows at the time were done live, and if you're lucky, maybe had been recorded on kinescope, which, you know, various degrees of quality.
Yeah, you wonder, you know, what was, you know, so many people at the time discarded, you know, we were talking earlier about the old Dumont kinescopes that were just thrown in the garbage. There were apparently a few visionaries out there who did want to preserve these for future use. And the Adventures of Superman and the Cisco Kid are two examples of that, where production values are obviously pretty tight, but they put, you know, their money into the color aspect of it, and that's the thing that's probably kept them alive. You can think of other TV shows from the era that are black and white, but also had high production values, like let's say I Love Lucy, which had very high production values for the time, but was shot in black and white. Those are the ones that have really survived. The ones that either were able to be shown as color reruns in the 70s, or were just well produced, well written, sophisticated comedy.
Trying to think, there was another show that was in heavy play along with the Cisco Kid, Superman. It was, oh gosh, what was somebody of the Yukon?
Gee. Sergeant.
Yes, Sergeant.
Oh, geez. Wait a minute. I will think of it in a second. Sergeant. I keep wanting to say York.
That could be it. Yeah, Sergeant York of the Yukon, maybe.
No,
but I mean,
I'll think of it here in a second.
But that one played a lot. I mean, you have the Lone Ranger, Cisco Kid. I mean, I remember, and then Sergeant York of the Yukon. But that's one that, I mean, we're talking about it now, and most people would be like, "What? Never heard of that."
To tell you the truth, Sergeant Preston of the Yukon. I was struggling.
That's
with
it.
Okay.
That's it. Yep.
That one took me a minute. Yeah, I was struggling to remember it, but now with the title in my hand, that was actually a pretty good show.
Mm-hmm.
And not all of these were, and it was a little later too. It was like mid to late 50s, right?
Right. Yeah. But I mean, still for me, like I mean, I was a kid in the 60s, and every afternoon there would be this rotation of these kinds of 50s adventure shows. Strictly, I mean, they had to have been made with kids in mind when they were produced originally, I would think.
Before you were talking, I wanted to bring this back because we mentioned Duncan Ronaldo conveying a very solid, heroic portrayal of a Latin person. We also have the Lone Ranger on Tonto. Tonto was played by a Canadian of Indian heritage, a Canadian, Jay Silverheels. I forget what his real name was. And he, so the Lone Ranger and Tonto. Tonto was also a heroic character, although he gets beaten up a lot in the film. And, he rescues this Texas Ranger who, with his brother and the entire group, were shot and ambushed by Butch Cavendish. That's the legend of the Lone Ranger. And Tonto was always portrayed as a heroic character, very positive image for Native Americans and Canadians. And Jay Silverheels, I guess, he did other roles after the Lone Ranger. I understand that he and Clayton Moore were very close in person. What do you know?
For a role like that, you would have to. You couldn't have an acrimonious relationship because it would read, even in a children's show, it would read, on screen. You have to have, a couple of actors who do have some sort of bond, some camaraderie, the ability to work with one another. Gosh knows from my career, I could cite many examples of people that I didn't really want to work with. But yeah, they had to have some mutual respect for one another in order to convey the relationship because, Tonto he's essential to the Lone Ranger. He's not just a sidekick. He's sort of like, Britt and Kato. It's a very similar idea, similar concept. There's it takes two people to bond together in order to make things right.
The first buddy film or the first buddy TV show, but also remember that the producers of the Lone Ranger also produced the Green Hornet. And again, we make the Green Hornet a distant relative of the Lone Ranger.
Mm-hmm. And I do think that appeals to children too. It's fun to see, instead of having Superman sort of defending the world, in this case you got a couple of buddies who are out there trying to make things right for everyone. And you see that in comedies, you see it in westerns, you see buddy films used to be so, even with Bob Hope and Bing Crosby, you used to see it so much. And I guess you still do in entertainment. But it was just an interesting way to look at their relationship and their bond together.
We're going to bond something more here together and keep it going with Brian, Gene, Tim. You're in
The Paracast.
We are audiostack.ai.
Combining AI writing, the best synthetic voices,
with production and delivery.
Be it ads, podcasts, or VOs for video.
Just like this ad.
How would you utilize AI audio? For free.
Go to audiostack.ai/contest.
Give us just a few details.
And you could replace this spot and be heard by millions.
See webpage for T's and C's. audiostack.ai/contest.
Make this summer truly unforgettable with a swim spa from Bullfrog Spas. Experience the perfect blend of space for swimming, playing, and exercising, along with the ultimate relaxation provided by our exclusive Jetpack therapy system. For a limited time, save up to $5,000 and receive a complimentary swim tether kit valued over $400. Make your family exercise and relaxation dreams of a Bullfrog swim spa a reality. Special financing options also available. Visit your local Bullfrog Spas factory store today.
Bullfrog Spas. Peaceful body, peaceful mind, peaceful home.
This is Jacques Vallée. You're listening to the Paracast, the gold standard of paranormal radio.
So, folks, this is the final segment of our main show, but we're going to have Brian back for the After the Paracast podcast, because when you have this kind of presentation, we never run out of all these great treasures. Because remember here, even when the studios were just churning them out, most of the people who did the work were extremely, extremely talented people. And they tried their best to do something. Even when the film was very cheap, like with the first Superman movie serial with Kirk Alyn as Superman, they couldn't get the normal flying scenes, the special effects to work, so they used a cartoon animation to make him fly, which I thought was dreadful. And I thought to myself, well, the Lydecker brothers made Captain Marvel fly in 1941. How come they couldn't figure this out years later?
You are correct about the animation. As I recall, it really is pretty bad. It's kind of a stain on an otherwise really, really solid serial. Quite honestly, I like Kirk Alyn as the Man of Steel. I think he did a good job, and he was somebody else who had career-wise had so many near misses. He almost was somebody, and of course for us, people who like to historicize, films and such, he is somebody because he's the first Superman. But I mean, career-wise, he, like I said, he almost made it. Things just didn't come together for him, I think. And in addition to the fact that he couldn't get any further career momentum, he was starting to get older too. He's about 37 or 38 years old when he makes his first appearance in the Columbia Superman serials.
Now, one more thing about Kirk Alyn. He was quoted as saying that when they were planning the Superman TV series, they did talk to him briefly, but he got the impression they weren't too enthusiastic about the thing. So he of course, wasn't enthusiastic and didn't consider the role. In the second film, Adam versus Superman, where you meet Lex Luthor, they actually did some passable flying scenes there. They used the animation, but they actually mixed in. And just a side note, the same year that he played Lex Luthor, in a Batman movie, Lyle Talbot played Commissioner Gordon.
That's right. And, Lyle Talbot had to have one of the largest filmographies of any character actor in the 20th century. He's in everything. He's in terrible Ed Wood movies. He's in A Pictures. I don't know how he did it, but that man worked. I don't think he ever made a whole lot of money at any one particular job, but he had so many jobs that he had to have been a wealthy man by the time he retired. At the same time, he's appearing in terrible Ed Wood movies, which I love, so I'm not knocking them. It just seemed like, yeah, I'll be there on Tuesday. Yeah, have Kraft make me a sandwich.
I never heard about his personality very much. Was he a pretty straightforward guy outside of the theater and the movies and TV?
As far as I know, he was just, a workaday kind of guy. If he had any addiction issues, it's nothing I knew of. He probably couldn't because he was always working. You can't have a habit if you're always on set, And he was good at what he did too. Just like I said, to see, I got to go back and take a look at this right now because I've just got to see how many entries he must have in his filmography. And just checking IMDb right now, we're looking at 336 items in his acting filmography. His last appearance was in Amazon Women on the Moon. I think that's awesome that he worked that late into life because he would have been 85 at the time Amazon Women on the Moon came out. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie or not, but it's sort of a send up of old 50s sci-fi films, and along with a couple of other genres at that. It's very cute, very well done.
Wasn't John Landis one of the producers?
I believe so. I think you're right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But Lyle, like I said, he worked just about every day of his career, and he did TV. Just looking down through his filmography, he's on Who's the Boss, Newhart, St. Elsewhere, Dukes of Hazzard, Charlie's Angels, Green Acres, which I find kind of interesting, but I could see him in that. He worked frequently. I guess, like I said, he, like everybody else, he had bills to pay and kids to raise and such. I suppose. I guess he just had to work.
He might have liked doing it. You never know.
Well, looking over the number of spouses, I'm beginning to think that he had some alimony to pay. We're up to 5 here so far.
Oh boy.
And 4 kids, one of whom went to medical school. So I'm thinking that Lyle just had bills to pay.
Well, he left a body of great work. Now, on the other side of the coin,
a lot of X's.
A lot of X's and a lot of bills, yeah. But we go back to careers. He had a good career. We mentioned some people who appeared in these serials and these very cheap pictures doing real well. The other exception is Captain Marvel, Tom Tyler, which is the curse of people playing superheroes, by the way. You think of George Reeves either shooting himself or being shot. You think Christopher Reeve has this accent that leaves him disabled in a wheelchair. You think of Tom Tyler, who developed, a serious rheumatoid arthritis problem a couple of years after Captain Marvel?
He was diagnosed not long after Captain Marvel. The onset of it was so fast for him, and it wrecked his career. After a while, he just couldn't work anymore. And so sad, too. He's another figure in serials that there's really not a whole lot of information on. I mean, he was married a couple of times, very briefly. No children that we know of. Came to Los Angeles, by the way, of Michigan. He was from the Detroit area. And he was a physical culturist in the 1920s, very tall, in great shape back in the day. And he was kind of a physically imposing guy and got into films that way.
So isn't the Hollywood stories always the same? You get the rare people who become real famous, and the people who do all this workaday stuff, the stuff that we enjoyed so much, their careers sometime, for whatever reason, don't quite take off as they should. And that's kind of sad, kind of unfortunate. Brian Walker, for those who are endlessly curious about the days gone by, films, TV, where can we find more about you?
You can always check out the Drive-In Theater website at briansdriveintheater.com. I have more than 350 B-movie actors profiled on the website. Some of whom I'm sure you've heard of, such as, let's say, Jane Mansfield, Mamie Van Doren, Diana Dors, on down to people that maybe you haven't heard of so much, such as Tiffany Bowling. And you can also find me on social media on Facebook.
And by the way, another thing we might forget, that Jane Mansfield was the mother of Mariska Hargitay, who was so famous for Law and Order SVU on television. Anyway, thank you. We can be found on Facebook, X, Threads, maybe TikTok someday. I'm trying to figure that out because it's too visual. We are known as the Paracast. You can also order branded merchandise from the Paracast.shop. But the people at Cafe Press screwed that up royally, so it may be difficult, but we're trying to work it out. We offer a special version of this show free of the network ads on the Paracast Plus, the Paracast.plus, and we give you an extra special, the bonus podcast after the Paracast, where we get more discussions where sometimes we don't have to prohibit certain types of language. In fact, Brian will be back because we can talk with him forever. Okay, the Paracast.plus. Check out the lowest rates ever, the Paracast.plus. Brian Walker, it has been a blast. Thank you for joining us on the Paracast.
Oh, thank you so much, Gene. I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you.
The Paracast, featuring Gene Steinberg, is a copyrighted presentation of Making the Impossible, Incorporated. Tune in next week for a new adventure in The Paracast.
We are audiostack.ai.
Combining AI writing, the best synthetic voices,
with production and delivery.
Be it ads, podcasts, or VOs for video.
Just like this ad.
How would you utilize AI audio? For free.
Go to audiostack.ai/contest.
Give us just a few details.
And you could replace this spot and be heard by millions.
See webpage for T's and C's. audiostack.ai/contest.
It doesn't make sense to break up with your one and only unless you're falling for something saucier. Something with a crispy southern breading and one extra ingredient. Something that makes your taste buds tingle. Yeah, it's time to dump your old wings and get a new honey lemon pepper wing from Popeyes. And if that's not your type, don't worry. We've got 5 other flavors. So saunter down to Popeyes and get a 6-piece for just $5.99. We don't make sense. We make chicken.
Love that chicken from Popeyes.
At participating U.S. restaurants, price may vary.